Welcome to the Tyler's Place podcast, the official podcast of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. I am your host, Matt Bowers, 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason. The Scottish Rite is often referred to as the University of Freemasonry, and there's so much to learn from the historic end of things to the esoteric. What could be more esoteric than that of Brother Manley Palmer Hall? Brother Hall is probably best known for his book, The Secret Teaching of All Ages. And just recently, Brother Maynard Edwards, 33rd degree, sat down with Chris Williams. Chris Williams, formerly of the Philosophical Research Society, now heads up on YouTube the Manley Hall Society page, an independent group working as sort of a splinter group of the Philosophical Research Society, recording, digitizing, and transcribing the works of Brother Hall. And it's a treasure trove if you're into the teachings of Manley Palmer Hall and the esoteric end of things. And with that, here's the conversation between Chris Williams and Brother Maynard Edwards.
So let's start at the beginning, because there are a lot of people who know who Manley P. Hall is, or think they know who Manley P. Hall is, and a lot like Albert Pike, who's another one of our brothers. There's a lot of legend and myth mixed in with the fact and of a real person. So let's start with the real person, and in broad strokes, I guess, so to speak, who was Manley P. Hall?
Well, Manley P. Hall was a lecturer, an author, a mystic, astrologer. He was noted for, at least in the 20s and 30s, that was one of his titles. But he was really an enigmatic person who seemed to have an abundance of knowledge on esoteric, symbolic, and ancient wisdom. And he spoke consistently, incessantly, over 7,000 lectures between 1920 and 1990 during his time as a professional. Never gave up, never slowed down. He spoke on everything that happened in the 20s, the technological revolutions. Radio was a new thing, and he did radio shows. And in the 30s, when the Depression hit, he had pamphlets for 20 cents available. He kind of downgraded his printing process for that. Through the 30s, wondering, he did the horoscope for Hitler and Mussolini in 36, wondering if maybe there's a problem there. All through the atomic scare and the beatniks and the hippies and everything. So really, he's a man of the 20th century, and to look through his body of work and to read the lecture transcripts or listen to the audio, you get somebody who was able to put a timeless spin on the things that were very current of the day, but really shrouded in mystery as to how it was that he was able to speak uninterrupted, without notes, for at least an hour and 20 minutes, sometimes up to 2 hours, per lecture, with an abundance of knowledge, never really wavered or fished around for a name or recalling a particular, time in history. And just time after time, broad subject, anything Rosicrucian, Masonic, Theosophical, whether it's Eastern or Western mysticism, although the Western mysteries were certainly where he spent most of his focus. And his goal was to bring the ancient wisdom to a 20th century Western mind and sensibility. He was able to digest, in a sense, these old texts, which at the time were incredibly rare. If you could even find them, they were incredibly expensive, and he traveled extensively to build his library, his wisdom library. Of course, now you can just go to archive.org and download anything you want, but actually maybe some of those scans were books that he had made available, or at least preserved, and then brought into the modern age, because he felt that over time, throughout cultures, people have been working on the problems of human life and what it means, how it is that we can live a better life, this sum total of the wisdom and knowledge of the race, the human race, and that was still relevant. and he put it in modern terms. And as a speaker, he just seemed to be the right voice. And by voice, I mean not only the words, but the tone and the timbre and the pacing of his voice. A lot of people find him very relaxing, and as well as informative. So he dedicated his entire, and he worked tirelessly. His last two lectures, he was doing a series on stress, actually, and the last two, he just didn't show up. He just, like Les Paul, the guitarist, he played until he could not play anymore. And so one day he just didn't show up for work, but he never quit, never retired, and always kept, throughout all the difficulties of the 20th century and the tragedies and the horrible wars and pain and anguish that so many people experienced during that century, he never wavered and never let down his enthusiasm that someone will listen, someone will do something. And thankfully for all of this, he recorded up until 1955. His lectures were taken down in shorthand and then transcribed into a typed version. And from 1955 forward through 1990, they were recorded on audio, and thousands have survived. And as far as I'm concerned, that's my part, I guess, that I've played the most is to go back. And while I worked at the PRS for 12 years, I would record, digitize some of these old magnetic tapes that probably hadn't been played in 50 years, and then do what I can to try to preserve and really restore the quality of the audio. And then I put those up on YouTube, and there's over 100,000 followers now. So I feel like I'm continuing his work, or at least making the work that he did currently available. So it lives on.
The thing that sort of launched Manley P. Hall into the zeitgeist, if you will, because, I mean, this is a guy, he was a character of much fascination. I mean, celebrities were drawn to him, throughout the whole of his life. And but the thing that sort of brought him to prominence, if you will, is his book, The Secret Teaching of All Ages, which is his masterwork, so to speak. Talk a little bit about what inspired him to do that. And I think I'm also fascinated by the fact that it was an early experiment in self-publishing, so to speak, because, he talked about the book and promoted it and had people pay for it before it was written. And it's kind of that whole process is pretty fascinating from my point of view. But talk a little bit about that book and its creation, and then we'll talk about its impact.
Well, the story behind the book, The Secret Teachings, is a story unto itself. It actually could be a book or a documentary. I've been compiling some of his notes, as well as, what's happened over the years regarding the book. But initially, he was inspired from Madame Blavatsky and Isis Unveiled and The Secret Doctrine. They were both 2-volume books, and very, very heavy, very rich in text, really no diagrams or pictures to speak of. Also, Godfrey Higgins' The Anacalypsis, which would have been in the earlier part of the 1800s. And by the early 1920s, he felt that a new book needed to be put forth. And initially, he had thought, and he actually said this wrote this in an introduction in one of his All-Seeing Eye issues, it was that it was going to be initially a 2-volume text work with an accompanying picture book or book of images, because he felt strongly that, symbolism is so important. It's the language of the mysteries. It's the language of spirit, that if you're going to talk about these things and write about them, you should print them. And that's what he set out to do. And that was his initial goal. And that's what he stated right before he left in December of 1923, when he was 22 years old, to go on this round-the-world voyage. He wrote a book about it in 25 called 38,000 Miles of Impressions. And that's back when world travel was not really that easy. It was expensive, it was time-consuming, and roads weren't paved to a lot of these sites. But he felt that he needed to go. He needed to really see the Forbidden City. to go to Yokohama, to go to, I guess it was called the Near East or Palestine or that area at the time, and see these sites, go to Egypt and put himself there where the people were, who either wrote or descendants of people that wrote some of the great scriptural texts, and to see the sites, the actual, ritual and temple sites around the world firsthand. And he was funded through the Lloyd. It was a mother and daughter, Estelle, and the other Lloyd woman who had funded this travel. And then he spent, I think, 3 or 4 weeks at the British Museum as sort of a author in residence, researcher in residence, and same at the New York Public Library when he swung all the way back around the world on his way back to Los Angeles. And he took pictures, he took notes, he actually wrote letters back. That's what this book, 38,000 Miles of Impressions, is. It's a sort of a compilation. They're almost like diary accounts. And he'll write, at sea, January 1st, 1923 or 4. And so he really felt that for him to speak and to write about these places and these sites and the culture that put forth these ancient traditions and mystical disciplines, that he really needed to be there. And he did. And that's really what got him going. But I think by the time he got back and was talking to publishers, it very quickly turned. Probably by 1925, there's evidence in his writings and in articles that he's working on a single book, a large folio book. And he went to printers, the Crocker Company in San Francisco, because he was funded. And yes, it was crowdsourced. He sold all 550 copies of the subscribers edition. These subscribers were the ones that paid $75. And I think in 1926 or 1927, that was a considerable amount of money for a book that was yet to be published. But he had enough of a reputation and enough support that he was able to raise those funds. And it really developed during the process of the writing. One of the later chapters was the one on Bacon and Shakespeare, with the transparency that has, a portrait of Bacon, transparency of Shakespeare, or vice versa, that made the comparison. That came in as he was writing the book. Maybe it was Baconiana was something that he had either discovered or felt was important to include. The process as far as printing, color photography and color printing wasn't really that great in the mid-1920s. It's certainly since improved, but he wanted to do the best that he could, that was available, that humans could do. He wanted the very best. And he utilized the artist, J. Augustus Knapp, who had previously illustrated Lost Keys of Freemasonry, which was 23, I believe, around that time. Knapp, also known for his work previously in the late 1800s on Edidorfa, the John Eatery Lloyd, allegory and story about the journey to the center of the earth and the return. So these were important works, and felt that Knapp was the one to do it. He really understood these mystical disciplines and the symbology. So they worked very much together. And he was very open about the process. He would write in his publication, The All-Seeing Eye, as well as a California-based publication, the Overland Monthly. There were articles, and he would even have public viewings of the artwork. We have 3 new illustrations from Mr. Knapp, and we're going to show them next Saturday at 3:00. So he was very transparent and very open, very sharing about what he was doing throughout this whole process. And it really came together. I think by 1927, at some point, the work halted on the writing and compiling. So then it moved to typesetting, and then to printing, of course, and binding, and all the color plates that are at the head of each chapter. And he spoke on it just before it was released in 1928 and gave some fairly practical advice on how to approach what was then called the Big Book. Just as a point of interest, it was not really called the Secret Teachings of All Ages until the 7th edition, which I think was in 1945. And up until then, it's in the larger title being an allegory of secret teachings from all cultures across all. And if you can pluck out from the large title, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, but it wasn't until 1945 that was actually printed on the binder of the then reduced size in black and white, 7th edition.
One of the books that a lot of people like to bring up are The Lost Keys of Freemasonry, which was another of his very popular publications. So talk a little bit about that, and then I will tell you what my criticism is of it, which I bet you can guess. So go ahead and just let's talk a little bit about that book briefly, and then I'll tell you my critique, if you will.
Okay. Well, again, that was illustrated by J. Augustus Knapp, and I know he wrote about the legend of Hiram Abiff and how the stone that the builder rejected and the three ruffians, I don't know how accurate that allegory is, or the pictorial descriptions of it, the images that go along with it. I think that was one he did not publish himself. I think the McCoy publishing company put that out. I haven't heard one way or the other too much on that one. It's not really one of his popular titles in the mainstream.
Sure.
Probably because it's a little hard to understand.
Right. But for our group,
it's
it's catnip, so to speak.
Yeah, sure. No, I would love to hear more about, from your perspective about that book. I think it was one, and which the one thing for me that kind of jumps out that, and I've always wondered this, is why it kind of took him so long. Why would he be writing in 1922, 1923 extensively and speaking very favorably about, Albert Pike and, Masonry in general, that it would take him another 30 some years before he would enter into the Brotherhood? My guess, and it's just a guess, and it could very well be wrong, is that he wanted the freedom to maybe write and speak about some things that, once having taken an oath, it might be a very fine line, or at least a difficult, barrier, perhaps, that between wanting to put some information out, but also not wanting to reveal anything.
That is an interesting idea, and I'll answer. I'll respond this way. That is my criticism of him, is that he did all of his writing about Freemasonry, at least, that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's stuff that he touched on throughout the years that I don't know, but he did all of his more extensive writing about the Masonic fraternity, which he didn't really look at it as a fraternity. He kind of viewed it a little differently. But he did all of that prior to becoming a Mason. And so it's difficult to, take, for me, it's difficult to take that as authoritative, because he was operating from a place of he didn't have all of the knowledge because some of it, while, 20 minutes on the internet and you can find out about just about every Masonic air quotes secret that there is, there are certain things that, and I'm sure he would agree with this, that are ineffable. There are things that really can't be communicated because they're sort of an interpersonal dynamic, if you will. So that's my criticism of it. But it's funny that you say that perhaps he didn't want to be bound by a Masonic obligation, because there are other authors, certainly not of the same type of that Manley P. Hall, but Dan Brown is one that jumps to mind. Brad Meltzer is another, both best-selling authors that we've worked with at the House of the Temple, that are both big fans of Masonry, but they've never joined. And when you ask them about it, they say, well, if I join, I can't talk about it in this way, because then maybe I'm violating something, but if I do it this way, I can be friends with you guys. And, we just, that So it's an interesting. So I might take a second to. I might take a step back from my heavy critique of, well, he wasn't a Mason when he wrote all that stuff.
Well, I know he had great reverence all throughout his career, before and after entering, for the ritual, the rich history, the symbolism. And I think, and again, I can't speak or think for him, I can only infer from his words, is that it was the closest thing to a modern mystery school. I know there's BOTA, there's Rosicrucian Fellowship, there's a lot of different ones still out there and viable. But I think that there was such a long history, and of course going back to some of the Egyptian roots of it, and it's kind of hard to go much further back from that in history. And it was also that a lot of indigenous cultures, certainly more ancient cultures, were very rich in ritual. Puberty rites, to become manhood. I mean, they were ordeals that you would have to go through. Some people didn't survive some of these rites of passage, so you really had to, be involved with that in that way. But I think part of his reverence was that it was something that was active. It was something that was visceral, something that was corporeal, something that you had to involve your body. It wasn't just a bunch of metaphysical speculation and philosophizing about this or about that. He believed in a living philosophy of life. And I think because, again, from his words, that Masonry, afforded and provided that opportunity for ritual, just like you're saying, you have to experience it. You have to know. And there's no substitute for that. When you involve your body with something, you really know something in a way that you wouldn't know otherwise. You can't just grasp intellectually. It has to really hit you on all levels of your being.
It absolutely does. And, there, again, people who go onto the internet or I know that people don't do this anymore, but go into a library and they'll look up, say Masonic passwords or things like that. And they, if you were to jump into a room full of Masons and shout one of those passwords, we would all likely just point and laugh and walk away, because, there's a whole etiquette, for lack of a better word, surrounding all of that, you can't write down, and you can't really tell someone. They have to, as you mentioned, they have to experience it with their physical being. And even then they're still awkward about it until they sort of settle into the group and become a part of it. But I like what you said about that. He may have been not wanting to be bound by it. And another thing too is how old he would have been in his, I guess, mid-20s, late 20s when he was writing in that era in the 1920s. When was he born? Was it
1901?
No, okay, that's what I knew.
So
it was
he's
right around
really the
20th
20th century, just to subtract a year, and that's how old he was.
So here he's a young guy. I mean, a lot of people don't join Masonic lodges until they are in their 30s or 40s because life just doesn't permit it. You've got to build your career, you've got to buy a house, you got to find a wife, you've got to settle down, you got to do all that life stuff so that you don't get to ponder the larger, more the bigger questions in life, so to speak, until you're into a little bit older. So it could be as simple as that. So I appreciate that point greatly. So thank you for that. When people talk about Manley Hall, because on our YouTube channel, we'll get people throwing quotes at us that he said these crazy things, and some of them may be true or some of them not. What do you like when people criticize us and say, well, Albert Pike said all these crazy things? The biggest one is that Albert Pike said that the god of Freemasons is Lucifer, which is ridiculous on a number of levels. He never said it, and certainly it isn't. But what is the one thing that people say about Manley P. Hall that's just the biggest bunch of, for lack of a better term, BS regarding Brother Hall?
Well, some individuals have spouted some phenomenal BS, saying that, Manley and I were great friends and he left some secret books for me and I'm entitled to this. That's on more of the individual level. But as far as a larger audience. An interesting phenomenon, I think, has happened on our YouTube channel. Masonry is scary for a lot of people. The word, certainly not knowing anything about it. And it's just automatically, it's devil worship, it's this, it's the old boys club and everything that, I'm sure you're very familiar with.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of the everyday criticisms. And I think what's happened, what I've noticed from just the comments people leave on the YouTube lectures is that, oh, geez, he was a Mason. Well, maybe Masonry wasn't all that bad because I like Manley Hall. In a way, I think he's the knowledge that he was a Mason, and then actually people who listen to his words, I think some of them have softened up. But, there's a lot of rumors and things that he was a hermaphrodite, that he channeled everything.
I hadn't heard that one.
That there was, just all kinds of things. And he was a big man physically. He was a very, very large man. As a matter of fact, Stephen Heller, the Gnostic scholar who spoke and lectured at the PRS, he actually, when I lectured there back in the mid 2000s, I was on Thursday night, and Heller spoke on Wednesdays, and he, in his rich Romanian thick accent, said that people know Manley Hall he was a large man, and he had a very large mind. He was so smart, but what people don't know is that he had such a large heart. He was the kindest person I've ever met. So I think there's some things about him that, it's really easy to say that he was smart and well-versed and well-read and a great speaker. That's self-evident in his legacy. But what's behind that? And I think he really had a really deep love for humanity. And again, with what all happened in the 20th century, felt that his contribution was to bring forth the wisdom of the ages across cultures to bear on the problems of modern civilization and at this time, the contemporary mindset, that we can benefit from it. And that if we don't learn from this, we're just lost in the wilderness and we're doomed to repeat our mistakes. So I think maybe that's lost or just maybe isn't fully as appreciated as his intellect is his compassion and his real love, deep love for humanity.
So we've talked a little bit about many of his different philosophies, and it was almost a cafeteria tray full of different things that he would discuss and bring into his own, I guess, interpretation. Was he a man of traditional faith, however? Did he believe in I would imagine he intersected with, Christianity and Hinduism, Buddhism, and all the other isms that there are in his work. But what was his personal faith? Did he discuss that much?
I did. I do believe so. I would call him a Christian mystic. Christian being more of the adjective and mystic being the noun, the thing itself. Of course, once you're a mystic, you are welcome in any tradition, anywhere, because you see the one and all. You see the all in the one, God everywhere. There's nowhere where it can't be, in you, around you, in the rock and the stone, even in the center. And this is not only because he spoke about that and wrote books, but even his lecture schedule, there was always something about the Christian mystery, around Christmas time. Easter was a huge, he always gave a lecture on Easter Sunday, never gave a lecture on Labor Day weekend, always took that off. Never spoke about Halloween. I did a search. I think I have thousands and thousands of documents that are text searchable. And even though he gave many lectures on October 31st throughout the years, never was really there mention about Halloween, which I found kind of interesting. Not that maybe he was against it, maybe just wasn't all that interested. But as far as, the equinoxes and the real symbol, I wrote The Mystical Christ, several books, many, many lectures. Even if that wasn't in the title, if it wasn't the thrust of the topic, he would put that in there And it was always, the mystical interpretation. It wasn't the literal. It was what's behind it, the symbolism, the allegory, and of course that all the external things are really just outward images and examples of what is deeply an internal process. And through his speaking on the Christian mystery, Sermon on the Mount, all the scriptures, that there was always this inner quality, the inner life. He was very deeply concerned with that. And actually, I don't know, concerned's the right word, but he was, that was really the major thrust. It's like you can look at all these scriptures and you can read the outside things, but inside is the story. It's always the story inside, the story of you.
Brother Hall is one of those characters who I think that even though so much of his life is so well documented, will always remain, as you using your word at the beginning, enigmatic, so to speak. But even his death, which, he's 89 years old, there's mystery shrouding that. There are accusations that he was secretly murdered. And, when he was found, there were bees or bugs or something in his mouth. There's all kind. I was doing a little prep and Googled some of that and immediately realized what kind of rabbit hole it was to trip down. So I closed it off and thought, rather than indulge in that, let's talk to you and find out what do we know about the death of it. You certainly can't say it was untimely. He was 89 years old. That's a good run for anybody. We should all be that lucky, but there was still some mystery surrounding it.
Well, there was, and Daniel Fritz is the person who sometimes gets the finger pointed for killing or leading or contributing towards his death. I don't know how much of that is true. I believe Fritz had the PRS's and Manley Hall's legacy in mind, and that's evident by the work that he did in some of the publications, some of the reprinting of the books that was either done in Manley Hall's late life or after his passing. And that's only something somebody that would, who cares, would do. I know there were some perhaps holistic treatments, different, natural remedies. Hall really battled with his health his whole life. I'm not exactly sure what it was. If it was some, pancreas or some gland endocrine system that made him rather portly. He was tall anyway, but even in the 30s, with his first wife, Faye, she had him on a pretty strict diet, and you can see pictures of him where his face is all gaunt, and he just looks like a sunken, you see skull outlines on his face, but he still has this rotund pot belly. So whatever it wasn't really an eating thing. So I don't know if Daniel Fritz, helped accelerate his death, or maybe he kept him alive a year or two longer than he might have otherwise. So, there's a lot of mystery and darkness and things, but you're right. It's he was, and he, like I said, he spoke like 2.5 weeks before his death. He gave a full lecture, and the audio is crisp and clear. And there's even a video lecture from his birthday, which would have been March 18th, 1990. And he's just clear and cognizant and speaks effortlessly. So his mind was there, but there are some recordings, even in the 70s and early 80s, where he's got a sore throat or, kind of garbled, a little bit, but that's more physiological than intellectual. His mind was, certainly sharp as a tack throughout that.
Yeah. And one of the things is that people say is that he, as you mentioned, he was giving lectures and then he just stopped coming to work one day. And but sometimes that's how people go. I mean, they're fine until they're not. And then that it can happen rather rapidly, especially when you're 89. I mean, you're pushing 90 years old. It's not uncommon for things to take a rapid turn. So, but I wonder if, because of the, again, enigmatic life that he led, that the mysteries, people don't just apply to it anyway. Well, he was this guy who studied these weird symbols and had these weird philosophies and did these sort of out of the mainstream things. So, when they hear that he has died, even though it was 89 years old, well, there must be something strange surrounding it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's only one really printed biography by a Louis Sahagan. I think it was called Man of the Mysteries. I was working there when he did the research. I kind of helped pull stuff from the library as well as the librarians to help him with the research. The first chapter of which is actually pretty decent. The rest of it kind of, he was a reporter for the LA Times, and I think he was on the beat, the homicide beat or police beat or something like that when he was sent to investigate. Oh, there's just some old guy that, it's almost like Sunset Boulevard with, with Desmond, that this, somebody from the past that had died, and go find out what this person was about. But he put some, I think he put some things out there that really weren't necessary. Some of them I don't think were really true. Much of it was his own style, the way he interpreted and presented some of the material. But the first chapter was fairly factual and I think very, very well researched. What needs to happen, and this is something that I'm working on as I find time, is a very comprehensive biography, probably documentary, because there's enough pictures and things to really tell the story, but to tell it really from his point of view. As over the years that I worked at the PRS, people would come in and say, well, who was this guy? What did I just found out about him or something? And, what was he like? What's his story? And I always reverted to my, I guess, pat answer is that his bibliography is his biography. If you take a look at his speaking schedule, I have a spreadsheet that has over 4,000 that I know of, that I have actual record of, lectures that he gave over the years. And I know he gave many more, but he didn't stop. I don't even know if he took a lunch break. I mean, he was constantly working. So to really separate his, personal life or his biographical information from his speaking schedule and publication output, I think they were almost one and the same. Now, there's some parts of his earlier years, like how up until when he started speaking at the Church of the People, 1919, 1920, when he began his professional career, some of that was growing up with his grandmother. He made it to California because he was looking for his mother. I mean, I think they were in touch, but she had moved out to California. She was involved in theosophy and some other traditions and wound up in Oceanside at Max Heindel's place. Heindel had passed, I think, in 18 or 19. So by the time, or even before, so by the time Hall got there, his widow was running it's called the Rosicrucian Fellowship. Although if you talk to a real Rosicrucian, they're like, oh no, Heindel's thing is not it. That's something in name only. But something very, very interesting and I think profound happened when he did connect with his mother, because they had like a healing center, and she was a naturopath. She was a herb and nutrition healer. As a matter of fact, his book "Healing: The Divine Art" was dedicated to his mother. And when he got there, he, of course, was introduced to Heindel's widow, and he certainly had to have been interested in this stuff. I think a lot of that he got from his grandmother, his just voracious reader, and eating up anything he possibly could on the mysteries. But like a lot of foundations, a lot of organizations at the time, and to agree as well now, printing, self-publishing was a big thing. The Alcott and the Theosophists in Chicago, I mean, they were pumping out printing. They had their own printing press. They would print out their own books and booklets. And same is true at the Rosicrucian Fellowship, Heindel's place in Oceanside. I've been there. Of course, it's all boarded up now, but one of the buildings still remains. That was the publication room with the typesetting, the book bindery, the warehouse and the shipping that was going on. So he stayed there for a while. And I think that's where he really learned the self-publishing trade. He knew how to typeset. He understood books, not just, beyond just the content. I mean, the books itself, he had such a love of books. So when he started his speaking and publishing career, it was the Hall Publishing Company up until 1935, when it then became the Philosophical Research Society, when he started printing under. And as a matter of fact, the first building it's where the bookstore is now. The first buildings on the campus in Los Angeles were the printing room and the bindery and the warehouse. That was before there was a library. He was printing books, so that was so important. I think he got to learn the whole thing, like in its entirety, from just spending some months at Heindel's place.
It is rather, I guess, shocking that there's no real biography or documentary done on this brother, because he was friends with so many people in Hollywood. He was very close friends, if I'm not mistaken, with Bela Lugosi during the height of Bela's career. He was friendly with Ronald Reagan during, while he was an actor, and even after he became governor. Henry Clausen, who was our Grand Commander, counted him as a friend. Harry Truman, I think they were acquainted. And I'm a huge Elvis fan. If I turn my fake background off here, you'll see all my velvet paintings behind me. But Elvis wouldn't go see Manley P. Hall's lectures because Elvis, I think, was a little bit afraid of going outside and, for fear of the crowds. But he sent Priscilla to go see Manley P. Hall's lectures and then kind of report back. So the fact that he was surrounded in this entertainment industry in Los Angeles at the golden era of Hollywood, so to speak, and there isn't any documentary. Somebody must have approached him and he had to have said, no, not me. I don't know. Do you think that that's possible, that he shied away from that type of thing?
That would sound like him, to be modest and not make it about him. He spoke many times, especially like in the 1920s, his criticism of gurus that were in vogue at the time, selling salvation for $5.99 a month or whatever. He really wanted to make sure that it wasn't a cult of personality, that it wasn't about him. Although he knew the power of celebrity and popularity. Certainly Nicholas Roerich, was a very, very good friend. He would stay with him when he went there. And so it would be like him to kind of shy away from that, perhaps out of modesty or not wanting to conflict and be the guru type and be more about him than the work itself. But since then, and honestly, I will take responsibility for this one. I have not. I am working on things. I have compiled a lot of things together, and not to say that I'm the leading authority on Manley Hall, but I did get to, the times that I worked there, I did get to speak with many, many people who were working there at the time, who did know him intimately and deeply. And since I've been doing all this archival work and the audio restoration of his lectures, I think the onus is upon me to at least do what I can to do that. And I affirm to do so. I think I've been a little bit reluctant, like, who am I to do this? Or he's not around to ask permission. But in light of the Louis Sahagan book, I think there needs to be, maybe there needs to be 3 or 4 biographies written about him.
To Masons, I will tell you, Manley P. Hall is a constant source of fascination. There are a lot of people who believe that Masonry, and this is outside the scope of our interview, so to speak, but there are a lot of people who believe that Masonry is a very practical form of self-improvement. You do these things practically in earth, and you will have a good life, because it's, the square is a symbol that teaches truth and virtue, and it's the compasses teach us to keep our passions, as we say, in due bounds. So, control your emotions and things of that nature. But then there are people who believe, and I believe that this is what Manley P. Hall expounded upon, that there are hidden things, there are more esoteric things within those symbols if you dig a little deeper and you go beyond the practical into the mystical, the spiritual, or however you want to term it. I believe the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think that I think both things can be true. I tend not to go too far down the mystical rabbit hole personally, but I know that it speaks to a great many Masons, and he was one of the first to really, in the 20th century anyway, to expand upon that, and it still resonates with Masons today. There are a lot they joined because they knew that Manley P. Hall was a Mason. That is not an uncommon. I would say just as many people joined for Manley P. Hall as joined for Nicolas Cage and the Lost and National Treasure. That's 100%. I would say that those numbers are probably, 1 and 1.
Honestly, I didn't know that, and thank you for making that known, because I often wonder, not being, a brother myself, although I'm sure that's something that would be inevitable in my life. That's interesting to know, and actually that's very inspiring. It may even push me even further into doing some biographical things, because I just don't want it left to people like Louis Sahagan or just some random person on YouTube throwing something together and somebody else thinking, oh, this is the truth, because there's nothing to counter it. Again, what I would do, my approach to it would be to take as much as I can from his own words, not just his lectures, but his own, because several times every maybe 10 years, he would write an essay or a series of articles in his publications about, my philosophy up till now, or these things I believe to be true, or why I got started in, the esoteric teachings. So I think it's very important, and that's great to know. I'm glad that his legacy is still alive, and it's inspiring people to want to join.
Once again, big thanks to Chris Williams for taking time out of his day to share all things Manley Palmer Hall with us. And again, you can check him out on his YouTube page at youtube.com/@ManleyHallSociety. Thanks again for listening to the Tyler's Place podcast, the official podcast of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. Like this episode, share this episode, and we'll see you next time here at the Tyler's Place.